You went from a principal engineer to a distinguished engineer. I'm curious, what is the tour of duty there that got you promoted?
One of the, I think, underappreciated or misunderstood aspects of being a principal engineer is when people ask, "What do you do?" Like, give me a job description because I want to become a principal engineer. Like, what are the boxes I need to tick? The answer is actually embedded in the question, because people that have to ask that question by definition are not principal engineers, right? Because the problems become ambiguous enough at that level where you kind of have to figure it out yourself. Like my expectation for, I mentor a lot of principal engineers that come into Shopify. My expectation for someone coming in that level is, look, you basically, to use an analogy here, you're going to be dropped, parachuted into foreign terrain. You're in a reconnaissance mission, and within the first 7 days, you should figure out the lay of the land and figure out where the problems are, build alliances with your directors, VPs, whoever it needs to be, figure out what their problems are, and then kind of understand the situation and figure out where you can apply your particular skill set to help them, right? I don't have a prescription for you. Like it is your agency. It is your problem to figure this out. And that requires a particular kind of skill set and a toolkit that you have to develop to figure that out, right? Because there's a lot of ambiguity in that. Going to a level above that, kind of as a distinguished engineer, it's even more amorphous in many ways. There isn't any shared definition, right? But the way I think about it is proof of the dynamic range of the problems that you can solve. So, and then dynamic range kind of goes in a couple of different directions. One is technically. So are you able to, have you shown a repeatable record of being able to operate kind of at all layers of the stack? If you're engaged with a team, are you able to kind of go all the way down to the bare metal and understand what are the constraints, what are the problems, kind of from ground truth, reconstruct the problem? At the same time, are you able to operate with the business requirements, with your VP and product counterparts to actually understand what's in their head, how it manifests in code, and translate that into actionable change and like deliver the right product? That's the technical aspect of it. But then there's also the execution model, kind of in the middle, where you have to be able to flex. There are different types of projects that you get parachuted into. Some projects are working at the frontier of knowledge or product space where there's like just fog of war. You don't know what you don't know. And you have to be working kind of the startup mode of, look, we're going to fire, we're going to see where it lands, then we're going to aim, and we're going to fire again. And we're going to do that really rapidly, really fast, as quickly as we can, so we can figure out where the hell we are, and then we'll figure out what we're going to build, right? That requires a particular skill set. On the other hand, you can be parachuted into kind of a slower moving pace layer of the company where it's like, okay, guys, we have this platform API problem. We have just using like a random example, right? And it's really important that we think through how we design this API, because it'll have second and third order repercussions, like years down the road for our partner ecosystem and all the rest. So we need to engage our slow thinking brain to really understand how this change at this layer will manifest its way through all the others, right? And that's a very different mode of engagement. That's much more, in a way, academic, but you also need to be able to take all of that divergent thinking and converge the problem to like, here's the actual recommendation, right? So it really becomes the demonstration of your toolkit of being able to execute across all of those domains. Because when you talk to like the expectation for a distinguished engineer is kind of similar to a VP. Like it is a VP equivalent role, right? Like write me a description for a VP. Well, the job of a VP is to solve every problem that lands on their plate, right? It's like, and by definition, all the easy problems have been solved before, like at layers below them. So they only get the hard problems with incomplete information or imperfect decisions. So show me the volume and show me the versatility of your toolkit. That gives me confidence that I could parachute you into, like, I can give you this weird shaped problem next, and with reasonable success, you'll be able to navigate yourself out of it. One thing that I share often with folks that I coach and work with is I have this belief that a better way, a more resilient way to build your career is to optimize for being the only person as opposed to the best person. So what does that actually mean? There are two different paths that you could take. You could say, look, I'm going to pick a particular domain and I'm going to be the best person that will know the most about a particular thing. So I'm going to take security as an example, right? I'm going to learn everything there is to know, and that's going to be my life calling. And that's great. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can optimize for that. My personal philosophy is that is one way to success, but it is not the most resilient way to success. Because what if you pick the wrong field? What if the world changes under you? What if your particular company does not need that particular skill set? Be the only, to me, is about building a talent stack or a portfolio of skills that you can juggle and be effective. And I think this is actually reflects back in the dynamic range conversation that we were just having, right? Where you're able to say, look, and maybe this is actually me justifying my own career track, because when I look back on my career, I could say like, look, I was a mediocre designer. I was a mediocre salesperson. I was okay at support, but like, come on, like that's not my life calling either. But you know what I did really well? I combined all of those things into a unique toolkit that other people could not do. Like I could look at a problem and I could say, yeah, I could sling together a website. I know Photoshop well enough, and I know how to host it, and I know how to secure it, and I can stand all of that up for you in the next 2 days. You don't have to hire a team for that. And I have the dynamic range to do that. Now, if it turns out that we now hired a graphic designer, that's excellent, but great. I'm just going to take that particular skill set out of my quiver, hand it over to them, and I'm going to focus on the other things, right? And I think generally you can acquire very high competence, like 80, 90% competence very quickly in a domain. You can get to 80% in a matter of days to weeks. And especially now with the tools that we have access to with LLMs and all the rest, like the ability to acquire context is just amazing. You can spend the next year to get yourself to 90%. And now, if you optimize for that, you have resilience, because I'm able to converse with our marketing team, because you know what? I took the time, like I literally remember going on Amazon and I bought 15 books on marketing, and I spent a week nothing but reading marketing books so I could understand the lexicon, the jargon, and speak the right words when I talk to marketing teams. I'm also adept enough at working with our PR teams, because like I've written a lot, right? And I've practiced that muscle. I'm also an engineer. So now I'm able to bridge. So oftentimes when I find myself in conversations at Shopify or elsewhere, I'm the translator between all of these different parts of the company and organs of the body, where I'm able to kind of synthesize that information and bring it together. And that gives me a lot of versatility, right? It doesn't mean that I'm the smartest person in the room. Oftentimes it's far from the truth. I'm often the most senior person, but rarely am I the most knowledgeable. And that's actually very important, because part of my skill set is to figure out who are the most knowledgeable people and figure out how to leverage them in the most effective way, right? My contribution is I understand kind of the fundamentals of the platform and what you can do with our APIs or our platform. I understand the business requirements. There's a very messy middle in the middle of how you actually implement the solution with a number of variants. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to help the people that know the most about that messy middle navigate through that decision space. And I have a toolkit to help them facilitate that. But it doesn't mean that the most senior person in the room knows all the answers, which I think is a mistake that a lot of engineers make when they think about principal engineers. Like, oh, if you're a principal, you know everything there's to know about the web platform. It's like, well, not really, right? Like what I've learned is a lot of pattern matching. I've learned how to find answers. I know where to find answers, and I know how to navigate myself out of tricky situations. But it doesn't mean that I know every API and every quirk. Now, some people do, because that's what they make their life calling. And I think that's perfectly fine. But as a general strategy, I think it's not as resilient. An anti-fragile career is where you have a set of these capabilities where you can just swap out in any given moment and say, okay, well, I guess I'm solving a go-to-market problem right now, so let me pull out my other quiver of capabilities.
I see. So when you say don't be the best, be the only, you're saying that generalists have an advantage because they can put together a bunch of skill sets, get most of the way there, and be the only because the intersection of all those skill sets is more special and more resilient because you have such a wide toolbox. Is that right?
Yeah, this is literally probability math, right? It's like how many people, if you multiply out the probabilities of how many people know have this particular skill set, like you know enough about databases, you know enough about graphics, you know about UI, you know enough about all these other components. Who is the person that is the only person that has sufficient domain expertise and connective tissue to solve this problem, right? So being the only is about having a wide range of tools that you can reach into and say, hey, I can combine them in any particular way, which is what makes you versatile and makes you effective in these kind of ambiguous situations where you can, based on the situation, adapt how you work, right? Because I can shift gears and say, look, I've been a manager before. I understand what it means to do performance management. I understand how to coach people. So I can, even if I'm working as an IC, I can take an engineer aside and say, look, like here's some feedback or here's some recommendations. I know how to conduct myself. I know what things to say, what not to say, and help them along the way, right? It doesn't mean that I'm exercising that skill all the time, but I'm able to be parachuted into a situation where I can act as that temporarily. And that's turned out to be incredibly helpful.
I had one mentor who did 𝗪𝗍 as well, and he said that management always appreciates an IC that understands management because it's much easier to partner with them.
Yes, absolutely. So I would absolutely encourage, if you're an IC track and you've never tried management, like being a TL is a great learning wheels. You should definitely try if it suits you to do management as well, but don't assume that it's a one-way path. Right? You can go back and forth and there isn't a stigma. I think historically there has been in some organizations because also we've kind of painted this picture of, hey, the path to success is you grow to be a manager, right? But that's not, like when I talk to a lot of managers in like high roles, directors and all the rest, you know, after you sit at a bar and have a couple of drinks, they're like, you reflect back on when were you happiest in your career? They say, you know, it was a couple of years back before I became at X. Because I was really competent at that thing and I was loving it, but I was told that in order for me to like grow, quote unquote, I needed to take on this other thing. It's like, well, that's an interesting reflection, right? And at the same time, they will reflect and say, but I've also learned a lot in this new role. I appreciate what it means to run a team, the complexity, the interpersonal dynamics, the performance management and all the rest. And that's an amazing tool to have in your toolkit. Great. Now, let's set up our organizations in a way where that is okay for people to transit between those roles. You're not penalized, and let's not, as an industry, position it as some sort of like demotion, right? Because oftentimes it's like, oh, you're a manager, you became an IC. What happened? What do you mean what happened? Like nothing happened. I wanted to take on a new challenge. Like that's not a demotion.
Hey, thanks for watching that clip. If you thought it was interesting, it's from a longer conversation that's available right here, right now. And if you have any feedback for me, feel free to drop a comment on YouTube. I read every single comment that I get.